Well, welcome to our daily psalm. Today we're reading through Psalm 14. Psalm 14. Now, if Psalm 14 were taken to the Crufts Dog Show, it would be entered into the mongrel category. Psalm 14 is a bit of a mixture, really. It's part lament, part wisdom, and with a little bit of the prophetic thrown in. Its overall message is that humankind is universally and fundamentally turned away from God, but that there are some people who have been and will be saved. We'll jump straight in. Psalm 14 verse 1. The fool has said in his heart. Now we just need to pause for a moment over this character, the fool. Don't think that this is someone who is just a bit daft. The fool in the Old Testament is someone who is aggressively morally deficient. The fool is the diametric opposite of someone who is godly wise, the opposite of someone who is noble or honourable. So the fool has said in his heart, God is not here. So the fool is the person who is deeply characterised, he said in his heart, deeply characterised, not by thinking that God doesn't exist. The fool isn't an atheist, but that God can be discounted, that God doesn't matter. So the fool has said in his heart, God does not matter. The verse goes on, corrupt are they, and abominable in their wickedness. There is no one that does good. And there's a switch in the second line of the verse from singular, the fool, in the first line, to plural. So this fool now is generic, typical of society as a whole. Psalm 14's verdict is that the world at large acts as though God is not there. Let's go on to verse 2, because if that is the view about society at large, well, then we get God's view on it. Verse 2 starts the Lord. Verse 1 started the fool. Verse 2 starts the Lord. It immediately counters the statement from the fool that God is not here, God doesn't matter. Oh yes, he does. And the Lord, verse 2, peers down from heaven. It pictures God leaning out of a window and looking down. The Lord peers down from heaven upon the children of earth, to see if there is anyone who is wise and seeks after God. But everyone, and that is emphatic that phrase, the whole jolly lot have turned back, have turned aside, all alike have become corrupt. There is none that does good. No, not even one. So verse 2 gives us the view from heaven of God's eye view on this. God has looked very carefully to check on the level of foolishness in society and finds no one who has a desire to know him, no desire for God himself, no hunger for God. It's a position that's taken up by Paul in the New Testament. He addresses in Romans 3 the crisis of the human race, abandoning God, when he's arguing that everyone, including the people of God actually, are under the power of sin. That little word with I in the middle, the stance which puts I, me, at the centre and not God. And Paul quotes Psalm 14 verses 1 to 3 word for word in Romans chapter 3 verses 10 to 12, that everybody has turned back. Psalm 14 urges us to take our basic spiritual corruption, which is there in all of us, as a matter of serious concern. And that we should never forget the condition from which we have been released and rescued. Paul writes elsewhere to the letter to the Ephesians, chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, as for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of the world. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you have been saved. One commentator calls this the flabbergastingness of the gospel. So verses 1 to 3 from Psalm 14 find society at large ignoring God totally, as though God does not matter. Verse 4 goes on. Do they not know, these people who ignore God, do they not know, those evildoers, who eat up my people as if they ate bread? They do not call upon the Lord. This is God speaking again. So God does have a people who are his, but they are suffering, they are persecuted, they're devoured, eaten for their belief in God. But those aggressors, the persecutors, have miscalculated. The seemingly helpless people of God have a defender. The same God that those chomping up God's people choose to disdain. And so the psalm goes on in verse 5. There, they, this is the persecutors now, they are terribly terrified. For God is in the generation of the righteous, is in the company of the righteous. Though they would confound the counsel of the poor, yet they, the poor, yet the Lord shall be there, the poor's refuge. Though they would confound the counsel of the poor, so though the persecutors would dismiss the poor, yet the Lord shall be there, the poor's refuge. Refuge is a shelter where the vulnerable hide from attack or from storm or from sun. So the people of God shelter in God, and the persecutors suddenly find that they are confronted by God himself rather than the people that they are persecuting. And understandably, they are terrified. They are terribly terrified, according to verse 5. For judgment will fall on them in time to come, if not now, and hence verse 7. Oh, that Israel's salvation would come out of Zion, where God lives, if God would come forth with his salvation. When the Lord restores the fortunes of his people, then Jacob will rejoice and Israel be glad. So verse 7 has a ring of prophecy about it. Relief from persecution may not come immediately, that's not what it promises, but its arrival one day is certain, is sure. One commentator, his conclusion neatly summarizes Psalm 14. Psalm 14 tells you that you are depraved, rescued, and secure, leaving you at last in the hands of your mighty fortress. Not bad for a mongrel, is it? Let's take a moment to pray. O God, in a world which largely ignores you, says that you do not matter, look with mercy on those who are consumed by ignorance, greed, self-possession, self-absorption. And let the children of God know that you are God forever, that you are their refuge, and that one day you will restore the fortunes of your people forever. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer.